Hey guys, Joe here, the Joe Madden Sports Podcast, joined by a fantastic guest this morning, Pete Jensen, Director and Senior Fantasy Editor at the NHL Network, host of the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast. Pete, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, and always great to join a big hockey fan like yourself. And during the most important time of year, right, with the Stanley Cup playoffs, and we're down to 3 teams, and the Avalanche are already punching their ticket to the Cup final, and either the Lightning or the Rangers are going to join them. So great to break it on with you.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic part of the season in the NHL. I can't wait to talk these Stanley Cup runs with you. First, let's talk about how you got into the industry, Pete.
Yeah, so I kind of broke into the industry right out of college. I was always a big fantasy sports player in high school and college with football, hockey, basketball, and baseball. Got an opportunity at the NHL. Was working as a producer at night my first year, then moved over to the day, then kind of, with my background in journalism and broadcasting from college at Penn State in Pennsylvania, kind of carved out my niche in the fantasy side of things. And of course, now it's getting into more betting coverage and things like that. But have thankfully been able to carve my niche at something that was being served at the NHL, but nobody really had ownership of it from a content standpoint. So I started contributing with rankings and a fantasy mailbag and things like that. And then it kind of just took off from there. So now I'm able to do kind of social media, TV coverage, radio, our podcast, NHL Fantasy on Ice. It's a really fun job, multifaceted, but that's kind of what I wanted to do out of college. So, yeah, that's kind of how things came into fruition. And over time, the NHL, to its credit, has taken advantage of, the fan engagement elements that fantasy and now sports betting provide to the audience, and kind of reeling in new fans each passing day.
Yeah, absolutely. More and more fans loving hockey. Where did your love of hockey come from, Pete?
I mean, I was a big hockey fan my whole life. I went to a lot of Islander games when I was younger. I was a big Buffalo Sabres fan in high school when they were one of the best teams out there, came very close to winning the cup. Still kind of irks me that they weren't able to do it in 2006, but that's kind of where it came from. A lot of my best friends, even when hockey wasn't my favorite sport, I had a couple of friends in my life that were always big hockey fans. I was going to games with them at the Nassau Coliseum. And then, when I got this opportunity, even though hockey at the time may not have been my number one sport, I think it's a good lesson to anyone out there pursuing your dream in sports and working in broadcasting and things like that. Like right now, hockey is, and it's not even because I work for the league, it's my favorite sport to watch. I think it's the fastest, most exciting sport out there. And the parity and unpredictability of it keeps me on my toes in my job with predictions and things like that, and also keeps me excited every single night, even when I sign off from work and I'm watching games. It's amazing to watch and very unpredictable anytime I flip the channel to a different game.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so much passion in the NHL. We've got phenomenal games going on right now. Before we jump into those, can you tell us a little bit more about your NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast, where people can find it and what days it goes?
Sure. Yeah. During the season, it's usually Mondays and Thursdays. During the playoffs and during the off season, around the draft and free agency and stuff like that, it's more like once a week. But it's myself and Nick Alberga, who's been covering hockey for over a decade up in Canada. We kind of break down the fantasy impact, fantasy spin, betting implications, futures implications of anything that happens in the league. Bruce Cassidy gets fired by the Boston Bruins. We're talking about what that means for their top players, what it means for their Stanley Cup appeal next season. Are they going to go into a rebuild if Patrice Bergeron doesn't come back, if he retires? These are all things we weigh all year long. We cover the draft, we cover free agency, we cover sleepers, and we do mock draft and bounce back players. We try to predict the future as best we can. It's tough to do in hockey, but for fantasy and betting stuff, that's the name of the game. So we try to cover it 24/7, 365, give you an episode or two of NHL Fantasy on Ice every week, all year round. And I think more times than not, our audience appreciates it and has a fun time following along for the ride. So yeah, definitely check it out. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We post clips on YouTube, and you can follow all our fantasy coverage at NHL Fantasy on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Absolutely. You guys make sure you go check it out. Now, Pete, as a Calgary Flames fan, I hate to put you on the spot here, but I want to know if you have any thoughts yet on Johnny Gaudreau, if you think he'll end up leaving the Calgary Flames for the upcoming season, because this is a big fear in our city.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that now that's hanging over their heads, right? Because they were one of the top cup contenders, especially in the regular season after they added Tyler Toffoli, and they really kind of took command of that Pacific Division as Vegas fell out of it. They were playing their rivals in the second round. I wasn't shocked that they lost to the Oilers with all Edmonton star power and the addition of Evander Kane, resurgence of Mike Smith, top level production by a couple of their different forwards, McDavid, Draisaitl, Zach Hyman, so many guys contributing for them. But was I surprised or shocked that it ended in 5 games? Yes, absolutely I was. So I think, it's kind of going back to the drawing board here. Hopefully the trust that they've earned with Johnny Gaudreau pays off, with him hopefully wanting to stay there. If he ends up going somewhere on the East Coast where he's from, it's unfortunate, but with a star player like that, right? We saw it a couple of years ago with John Tavares. He built that trust with the Islanders through the years and then kind of let them down when he signed with the Maple Leafs. But that's what happens sometimes. So I think even worst case, if Johnny Hockey goes out east somewhere to play for the future, they still have a tremendous core. Matthew Tkachuk's one of the best power forwards in the league. Jacob Markstrom, one of the best goalies in the league. Unheralded defense this season, especially in the regular season. Elias Lindholm, number 1 center. I mean, they have a lot of things still going for them, even if the worst case scenario happens and Johnny's no longer in a Flames uniform next season.
It is definitely going to be heartbreaking if that happens, but I have faith in Sutter to try to keep him there. At least he has a fantastic coach there. That might be something that weighs into his decision-making, hopefully.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Sutter has been around for a long time. You don't know if Johnny's going to want to sign a max contract type thing. I mean, that will probably put him beyond Sutter's tenure there. I mean, as we've seen in the NHL, right? Like even with a coach like Barry Trotz's success with the Islanders, like he had one bad year and he got fired. I don't expect that to happen anytime soon with Sutter, but I think only 4 coaches in the entire NHL have had a tenure of 5 or more seasons. So it's pretty amazing. I think it's Jared Bednar, John Cooper, and Mike Sullivan are the only ones that have had a tenure that long. So yeah, as much as Sutter's impact has been far-reaching, getting the Calgary Flames to reach close to their ceiling this season, I don't know if that's going to be an overriding factor necessarily, just because, he's an older guy. You don't know how much longer he's going to continue to coach the Flames.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about this run for the Stanley Cup. We saw the Colorado Avalanche sweep the Edmonton Oilers. I want to know if you were shocked by that, or did you predict that? I know you predicted in your brackets the Avs would come out on top.
Yeah, so I had Avs over Lightning at the beginning of the season, and I stuck with it at the beginning of the playoffs. So I'm not surprised that it's trending in that direction, especially after Tampa Bay bounced back and won consecutive games against the Rangers, holding serve at home. But yeah, back to your question, I'm surprised a little bit. I thought it would have been maybe a 5 or 6 game series. I had Avalanche in 6. I loved what I saw from the Oilers. I didn't love, obviously, that Evander Kane play where Kadri got injured, and of course Kane got suspended for game 4. Things kind of ended on a sour note. But yeah, with Edmonton, it's not that surprising when you really think about it. They were having a 40-year-old goaltender in Mike Smith who's been spotty through the years. Of course, had some great moments in the playoffs, but their defense is kind of suspect at times. Their secondary and third and fourth line scoring is hit or miss. You always know you're going to get the production from the top guys in Edmonton. Those guys scored like 2 points per game this postseason to lead the league. McDavid and Draisaitl. And Draisaitl, you got to give him a shout out, right? He was playing through an injury. So really admirable effort by him. But yeah, the roster construction in Edmonton is tough. You have so much money tied up to a select few players. So I guess to see the Avalanche dominate them in the fashion they did is surprising to an extent, but definitely not shocking.
Is there any goalies that you could peg out there you think Edmonton is going to go after? Because they're going to need to do something in goal for the next season.
Yeah, there are a couple of big names that are free agents. I guess it just comes down to, are they going to, is that some place where some of these big names want to sign?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we'll see what happens with Darcy Kemper with the Avalanche. If they win the cup, maybe they'll bring him back. Pavel Francouz is holding his own right now in relief for the injured Kemper. But Kemper is the top free agent. Marc-Andre Fleury behind him. He was rumored to be, maybe Edmonton, maybe Toronto before the deadline, but you don't know where he wants to play at this stage of his career if he has control in the matter. So Kemper, Fleury, Jack Campbell has been really good for the Maple Leafs, even though they can't get out of the first round. I don't think it's been his fault. Past 2 postseasons, Campbell's been tremendous. Ville Husso, breakout goaltender for the St. Louis Blues, is another one. And maybe he'll command a little bit more because he had a tremendous regular season and bounced back nicely after a slow start to the playoffs and had a shutout in the playoffs as well in the first game. So Ville Husso is going to be, it'll be one of those questions like, can he replicate what he did for St. Louis for a different team? But definitely Husso is going to be one of the top free agents after his breakout season. So I think any of those guys I just mentioned, if the Oilers can land him, would be a huge upgrade on Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on Jake Ottinger? Isn't he available to move this season too, coming up?
Jake Ottinger, I feel like they're going to do everything they can to keep him in Dallas for a very long time after his, amazing effort against the Flames in the first round. Lost 4 of the 7, but had a .954 save percentage. That's about as good as you could ever see a goalie perform in a losing effort, right? So it wasn't his fault. He kept a high-powered offense in Calgary in a very low-scoring series. That was by far the lowest scoring series of the first round this year. So, yeah, I do imagine that the Dallas Stars, especially with John Klingberg coming off the books this year, if they don't bring him back, they're going to have a lot of money to invest in players like Miro Heiskanen and Jake Ottinger in the years to come.
Okay, Pete, I'm not going to keep you much longer. I just need to know one more thing. Who do you think hoists the Stanley Cup?
I do think it'll be the Colorado Avalanche. I'm a little worried about the Kadri injury impact and if Kemper is 100%. But, I think that the Avalanche possession-wise would overwhelm a team like the Rangers if they matched up. If they play the Rangers, it'll be Cale Makar versus Adam Fox, which would be an unbelievable matchup among defensemen. And if they play the Lightning, it'll be the grizzled back-to-back Stanley Cup champions against the team that has never been able to break through and now seems poised to do so. So from what I've seen this postseason, you have to stop Cale Makar on the back end and his two-way play. You have to stop Nathan MacKinnon. You have to stop his sidekick, Mikko Rantanen. Gabriel Landeskog's playing on a separate line. Even without Kadri, the depth that they've displayed in the past 2 rounds with guys like JT Compher, Arturi Lehkonen. The Avalanche are a juggernaut right now. So that's, to me, the only team that could really beat Tampa 4 times out of 7. So kind of excited to see, especially based on my prediction at the preseason, to see if that matchup ends up happening and we could be in for a dandy in the Cup final. But, yeah, I would lean with the Avalanche just because I've been on them all year since the preseason.
Okay, I love it. Out of all the teams, I would love to see the Colorado Avalanche hoist that cup. But Pete, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell everyone where to find you and where to find everything that you have going on?
Yeah, definitely follow NHL Fantasy on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Like I mentioned, NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast. You can see me during the regular season on NHL Network. And yeah, just kind of trying to doing a little game coverage too for the Rangers when they're at home this postseason, which has been a lot of fun. You know, talking to Gerard Gallant and some of the players after the games and stuff like that. So kind of just like on a lot of the NHL platforms, providing fantasy analysis, some loose betting coverage, and having fun in doing so. I really love my job and love to connect with the fans. And if you ever have fan questions about fantasy betting or anything like that, looking to get involved, definitely hit me up at NHL Jensen anytime.
Pete, you're absolutely crushing it in the industry. Keep up all the great work. It was an absolute pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. Great show, and great to finally join you.
Thank you, Pete. You guys, I will be back in the next 5 minutes with another Joe Madden Sports podcast. Pete, have an absolutely incredible day.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you.